Hello folks, in this video I'm going to talk about something extremely important, particularly nowadays. In IR there's plenty of various fields, and today I want to start a course on one of them. So we are going to talk about ICC, not another one, International Security Studies. And in this course, I think it's going to be approximately 14 to 15 lectures. And I've designed the course according to the syllabus of my dear professor from Hacettepe University, Emre Soran. So let's kick off. In the very beginning, I would like to talk about interconnectedness, where in science in general. From your studies, you can recall that whenever you are studying physics, you're always applying math. Or whenever you're talking about biology, in most of the cases, you might need a chemistry knowledge. Or let's say you're talking about history. For 100%, you're going to be using other fields. And of course, you can see that social sciences are not the exception. And obviously, political science is not also. So we have science, we have social sciences, we have political science. And a field in this science is international relations, right? And here we have a subfield, which is called International Security Studies. So basically what we have to understand, it doesn't matter whether you're a freshman or even if you're a PhD, what we have to be understanding in the first place is that every single thing is connected. Why we have to know this? Because if you are an IR student, your main task is not to be able to master every single field, but rather to be able to envision and to see the very relationship that all of the sciences have, all of the subfields have. So whenever we are talking about IR, we are always referring to economics or to philosophy or to sociology, anthropology, literature, and so on. And here, international security studies also has borrowed some particular concepts from a variety of sciences. That's what we have to understand in the first place. So what is international security studies and what it is about? Okay, you know that there's wide range of various subfields in international relations. And maybe we can say that ICC is a central one. Why? Because when you think about the international relations in the first place, when it was emerged in 1919, of course, some of you might object that and you have all of the reasons to, but this is the mainstream, let's say, paradigm, so we accept them this way. So it was first emerged in 1919, right? So when you see the reasons why it was actually emerged, you can understand that there was a necessity for the conflict solving, or for the prevention of war, or maybe for the postponing of war. So in any case, you needed something like a specific field knowledge, which happens to be international relations. And when you think about it, what's the main task of the diplomats, or at least at that time, it was what? Security, right? And still, even nowadays, we're talking about security all of the time. That's why I think that we can say that this is a central study in international relations. That's a reason why we have international relations in the first place. Because states, they have to be defending themselves, they have to be pursuing particular policies that are going to benefit them, and they have to be collaborating with other states. So in order to be able to implement this international relations, they have to have the understanding of the security. So that's the reason why we have it in the first place. And of course, as I just said, international security studies, it's not something separate. It is exactly on the merge of a variety of subfields in international relations and other sciences. In the video I will be talking later on, I will be talking how it has evolved and why and how it was influenced, and you will understand how other sciences like economics, math, physics, sociology, philosophy have influenced its advancement. So when we go back in time, we see that there is just a variety of rulers all over the place. particularly in the Europe, right? And all these rulers, they have to interact with other states. And obviously, the main task of a ruler is to provide the security, right? At least that's what that's our common sense, that we have all intersubjectively see that. But of course, it wasn't this all the time. So before, there wasn't such a thing. And when you go back in time, if you go to Hobbes, for example, uh, there is a famous saying of his, Homo hominis lupus. What does it mean? Man is a man's wolf, right? So it means that the human nature is bad, and all of the humans, they're greedy and they're selfish, and they're going to protect only themselves, even in the expense of others. So in the first place, what we have to understand is this. But of course, let's have a different look at this in the beginning. Let's think of Maslow's pyramid of fundamental needs. What we have in the first place here? We have shelter, we have food, we have water, we have hygiene, or some other necessities like this. So if a person doesn't have an access to them, isn't it logical that the person is going to think himself or herself? So because I think I have to be adding this point on this, so you don't think that humans are that bad, etc. I think we have to be able to have a different perspective on this. Of course, I want to give you totally impartial knowledge. However, I just want to add this up and say, there is also an opinion in this way. So again, let's go back to Hobbes. So we have a human who is in nature state. So there is nothing. There is just human who has to protect himself or herself. So Hobbes, according to him, the nature of this person is bad. Okay. So there is not just one human, right? There is plenty of them, and their population is growing. And someone has to protect them from each other. Of course, from each other and from outside, from external threats. And how is going to do that? We don't have anyone. Okay, there is a ruler, there are lords, etc. But there is no real official, let's say, guarantee that no one is going to touch this person, no one is going to violate this person's right. Exactly. So that's why what we see people coming all together and deciding on this issue. And what people have decided by using the social contract, or let's say as an outcome of the social contract, we have a state, centralized state. We have a ruler who is obliged to protect these people, both from internal and from external threats, but mainly from external threats. Okay. So what they do, they endow this right to the ruler, to the central power. Okay, they give up on this to the state. So basically, they give up on their ability to decide, and they give it to the state. This ability to decide on their own destiny is called sovereignty, right? So now we have the right of the sovereignty vested in states' hands. And when do we have it? Exactly, 1648, following the end of the 30 Years' War, we have a Westphalian peace agreement. And here we can see that for the first time there is a right of sovereignty written in this official document. And we see that there is an agreement on non-interference into each other's external affairs between the states, European states, of course. But of course, no one said that no one is going to attack each other, right? Why? Because particularly what was emphasized here is that the wars shouldn't be based on the faith ground. So actually that was the main point. And here, after this time, what we can see is that there is an emergence of liberalism. There is emergence of liberal thinkers. Like who? Like John Locke, like Montesquieu, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, like Immanuel Kant, etc. Or Leibniz, for example. So all these philosophers, they have been focusing unlikely Hobbes and Machiavelli, they have been focusing, let's say, on the good sides of human nature. But what actually we mean by saying that the human nature is good? Again, let's think of this necessities, fundamental needs of the person, of the human. So, okay, if a person has an access to hygiene, to health, to food, to shelter, of course, this person is going to be less aggressive, and this person is going to be apt to focus on things like self-actualization, etc., etc. Now, person can uh, busy himself or herself with the studies of philosophy, of languages, of science. Person can devote himself or herself to something more superior, right? But if a person cannot fulfill these basic needs, how a person can do this? So now we can see that since the wars more or less have stopped, of course they continued. There was a never point in a time when there were wars. Wars had always had their place in there, but now we can see that the number of these wars has drastically decreased. And now people can enjoy some peaceful time. And when you have a peace, it means that you can go to prosperity. So we can see that there is a general advancement of the conditions, a betterment of the conditions in Europe, in particularly in the Western Europe. After a century, we are coming to the American Revolution, and we see that for the first time in history, there is a Bill of Rights, right? That was written by the founding fathers in Philadelphia. And when you think about it, this was actually a rebellion against what? Against this structure of absolute monarchy, of unaccountability to its people, and perhaps the exploitation of the people themselves. So for the first time, officially, people have recognized that a human has a rights. And these rights must be fulfilled, they must be protected by the state. This is important. Why? Because after that, in 1789, what do we have? We have, yes, French Revolution. So the monarchy was overthrown. And even despite the fact that Napoleon is going to be also a dictator, it doesn't matter. What matters is that now we are having the concept of nation. So now we have a common language, we have a centralized education system, we have general centralization all over the country. So now people are not going to war because they believe in particular faith, but rather because they are one nation. So now what we can see is that most of the progress of enlightenment was actually thrown into the trash, because even despite that, the emperors and the kings and queens, they were trying to embrace more liberal policies, everything was in vain. So actually this Napoleonic Wars, they, let's say, brought Europe back, and they have made rulers even more allergic to the new ideas, let's call it this way. And for that reason, when there are wars, and when a state tends to be more close to all these innovations, states kind of turn into hedgehogs. And basically, when states turn into hedgehogs, we see that the level of radicalization increases. So what do we have in the end? We can see that the advancement of sciences does continue. However, there is a major point here, is that natural sciences, they continued developing and reaching the space. However, when it comes to social sciences, its progress was a bit slowed down. And this is a problem, and you will understand it later on, because now states wanted to focus solely on technological advancements, rails, steam engine, manufacturers, etc. But there wasn't really much contributions that were actually recognized and appreciated by the states anymore. Now, the social sciences, they started to turn into leverage for justification and legitimization of the policies of the state. So now, since Europe has advanced technologically, and it has advanced in military sector, in economic sector, and we already have the emergence of capitalism. So now they're having, let's say, extra money to spend. Now they have the capital, and they have invested this capital within the country, what enabled them to build up their military, to upgrade it. And now, what do we have? Of course, we are having this from the 15th century, but still. Now, the activities of, let's say, discoveries of other lands have drastically increased. So now we're having Spain in the now Latin America. We're having France in Africa, in Canada. We're having Britain in not anymore. No, we're having Britain in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, in some African countries, Portugal, Netherlands, Russia. So we see that after building up a particular capital and after advancing their capabilities, military capabilities, European states, they began colonizing other new lands. But of course, it was new for them, but not for the people who were living in there. So, and of course, when you colonize other people, you have to have a pretext. Because if you don't have a valid reason for doing this, basically no one is going to listen to you. Both neither your people nor people in there. Because you cannot constantly be forcing people, but you have to have a particular consent, especially when it comes to your own nation. So what did they come up with? When it comes to all these people all around the world, we have white man's burden. Now we are having social Darwinism, which was applied in order to justify all this violence, because the white man was a civilized one, and basically European states were, let's say, spreading the civilization. So it was a good pretext for them. I don't think for all these people it was, but nevertheless. So, and coming to the end of the 19th century, we are seeing that Germany and Italy, who were left behind and totally out of this game, they also decided to join, particularly after the meeting in Berlin, where they have partitioned Africa with other European, major Western European states. And now everyone is looking for the resources. Why? In order to pump their economy and their military. And of course, the variety of reasons are bringing us up to the point where we are entering into the World War I. Of course, some people say that this is the scarce of the resources. Of course, I'm not going to elaborate on the reasons of the World War I, but we just have to say that there was such a historical event. And now, in the end of that, now we have Germany who was defeated. Now we have some states in Europe that were defeated. We have some victorious states, but it's really a bit tough to call anyone victorious at this point, because everything was destroyed and everyone was devastated. But nevertheless, now in 1919, what do we have? We have emergence of founding of the League of Nations. And the main task of this League of Nations was, in order not to repeat or to prevent this wars happening ever again. Spoiler, it never happened. So now they're trying to sustain security, peace and security, to prevent wars, etc. But the point is that it was a kind of VIP club, and it didn't really help to solve any problems. States where there wasn't any impartiality at this point, and everything was done according to the will of the great powers. That's why we cannot call this purely international, peaceful platform for everyone to join in and to be a good one family. No, it didn't happen this way. And as you remember, after 30s, we're having Germany, we're having Hitler, who is just in a glance has altered everything in Germany, has upgraded the military and the economy, has built up a huge infrastructure, created companies, and now we're having World War II. And following the end of World War II, it's really hard to just escape this explaining the World War II, but still we cannot talk about it at the moment. So now what do we have? We have nations who eventually came to understanding that, guys, we cannot be fighting all of the time, and we have to evade these wars, and to never let it happen ever again. Because, the price of this war costed 60 million people, or even more. And this was a kind of huge one. So now we see that these nations, particularly great powers, the victorious powers, allies, what do they do? They establish the United Nations, right? And we can see that there's decolonization all over the world. And now we are having even more states joining it. And again, the main point, the main reason why it was created in order to maintain peace and security, in order to prevent any conflicts in any place of the world. But now we have another issue. And what is that? We have a bipolar system. Of course, France, the UK, and China, they were strong, but now we have another issue. We have two states who have emerged as a superpower, the United States and the USSR. And the problem now is that we already have an advancement of science and technology, but now they came up with something different, nuclear weapons. And the problem about nuclear weapons is that it's a weapon of mass destruction. It means that it can evaporate, basically, everyone everywhere and bring the whole planet to the end. And this was a huge responsibility to take on your shoulders, and now they needed to come up with something more precise rather than philosophical writings of Kant or Hobbes or Machiavelli, etc. Now they needed something different, and they found the solution in mathematics and in economy. Now we have another term. We have term of rational actor. It means that under normal conditions, no one is going to really strike first if someone is not mad. And since they cannot read what's inside of the minds, they understood that they can understand something by the behavior. Now we have behavioralism. So now we're having game theory. As I've told you, what do we call it? As I've told you before, international relations and international security studies have borrowed some concepts and some particular things from other sciences. And here you can see one. So we're having math and economics applied in the international security studies. Because why? If there's a strike to happen, they need to calculate everything super precisely. Who's going to make this second strike? How to make it? How much time do they have? Etc., etc. Because this is the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter whether you have Panthers or Leopards or whatever type of tanks. Even if you have some super aircraft, it doesn't matter. What matters is that they have nuclear weapons, the weapons of mass destruction. And at the point, you cannot really think about anything else. How can you think about human security? How you can think about women's rights being violated? How you can think about workers' rights? You cannot think about, right? So that's a problem. And now the whole focus was on this. But the good side of the bipolarity is that there are just two superpowers, and since everyone is a rational actor, under normal conditions, no one is going to strike. And this actually brings some stability. And this stability and this, seizure of the wars all around the world, of course there were wars, but at least not in Europe. And now we see that there's a peaceful time, and now states can collaborate. That's actually what particularly European states have opted to. They understood that if they're going to work together, if they're going to collaborate on various issues, they can make it better. They can have harmony, they can have peace, they can have prosperity.
And now in the beginning they're going to have a still community, and they will proceed with even more, uh, even broadened integration, etc., etc. So basically what I'm trying to say is that right now they're going to establish the fruitful environment for the prosperity, right? And what this means, if people, they don't have to be focusing on this fundamental needs, right? Or like shelter or food, they don't need to be trying to escape the war, or they don't need to be thinking about, are we going to have a meal on our table tonight or not? So it meant that right now they can switch their focus to some more superior human needs, perhaps. That's why, especially like after 50s and 60s, we are seeing various uh, communities, organizations that were begging for human rights, for women's rights, for workers' rights. There were some communities that were trying to attract the attention of the public on some marginalized groups, etc. So basically, it meant that now the security wasn't just about military and wasn't about wars. So now it was the security of humans, of people in general, of individuals. It was the security of women, it was the security of workers, it was the security of environment, especially after 80s and 90s we're going to have this debate, and this environmental security emerged. And especially, of course, we're not going to have a peace all over the world, and we can see that particularly after 80s and 90s again, and this is caused because of before we had interstate wars, right? Like in most of the cases, it was like one country fighting another country. However, right now, we're not seeing this anymore, at least not on this major scale that states are fighting each other. We see that there are not just two groups fighting each other within one state, but in most of the cases, it is the state who is actually being the oppressor, and state now violates the human rights. And this actually posed a huge issue for the international community, because someone had to protect these citizens. And normal, as we remember, it was the state who actually was bestowed the responsibility, not just the right, but responsibility to protect its citizens from internal and external threats. However, right now, what we have a state who is actually violating human rights within internal domain. And now we can see this normative commitment of the international community. And of course, they couldn't stay beside and just observe what's going on in there. And now we have another concept emerged, which is humanitarian intervention. And actually countries, they were under the flag of the UN, intervening into a particular failed state. What do we mean by failed state is that it has failed to provide with the fundamental needs for the country, like security, for example, because it is actually violating, because actually it is the state now who oppresses the society. For instance, one of the most explicit examples is the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, when the United Nations had to intervene and to stop the massacre, because state was actually on the side of a particular ethnic group, and it already cost over hundreds and thousands of people. And gradually, for instance, nowadays we are having a focus a bit on the critical infrastructure. What kind of critical infrastructure? For instance, some energy buildings constructions, or maybe railways, or data storage centers, because they really of paramount importance for the well functioning of the country in whole. And that's why, for instance, they're being protected in order to not allow for any disruptions, even temporary, for the country. because it really matters. So what I've tried to clarify here is that, again, interconnectedness between the different branches of science. As you can see in behavioralism during the Cold War, we had weapons of mass destructions, we had nuclear weapons, and you needed precise calculations, which were allowed by the existence of the math and physics, of course. Or we see the concept of rational actor and game theory, which came from the economics. So as you can see, in international security studies, it has borrowed various concepts from different science branches. And also, you can observe that the evolution of the international security studies was influenced by just variety of factors. And before we talk about this one, there is something else that I would like to mention. So now we are having security studies evolved under the social, philosophical, economic, political circumstances. And how do we understand that we are really having a progress, that we are at the right place and the right point? Because international security studies, it's also a science. Yes, it is a subfield, but still it is a science. And what is the purpose of science? Is to reach the truth, right? And when we are talking about natural sciences, it's not that hard to reach the truth. Why? Because you have quantifiable methods, and you can understand whether it's right or wrong. It is either black or white. Actually, many social scientists, they also wanted to have the same rigor and the same predictability in the social sciences, particularly in international relations. In a point of history, it was, for example, enormously crucial to have this rigor and this predictability, because they needed to make predictions and analysis. And many, for instance, even social scientists, they were stating that there must be naturalization of social sciences in order to make it more scientific in a way. And for example, some writers and for example, one of the writers came up with a scheme which is enhancing our understanding of are we at the right place or not, and how did this security studies evolve. But before that, there is also another point that I need to mention. Maybe you're familiar with Thomas Kuhn and the concept of paradigm. So basically, paradigm, imagine a building, right? What do you build first? The fundament, right? The essence. So the fundament of this whole theory that you're going to build or approach or whatever, it is built on this paradigm. Paradigm, it is something that you don't question. It's the key assumptions. For instance, let's say that you are going to write a theory on something, let's say in international relations, right? What do you need to admit in the first place? You have to admit that there is an anarchy, right? Or, for instance, that state is the main actor. So the multitude of these key assumptions is called paradigm. And here we are going to have a pyramid, and in the down part here we have general history and sociology of science. So basically every single thing that was built after that was built exactly on this fundament. So we are going to, from general to specific, we are going to narrow. Next one is sociology of science literature in international relations, and also some internal and external factors. So we are narrowing it, right? And here on the top we have international security studies, which is influenced by 5 factors. The first one is great power politics, technology, events, academic debate, and also institutions. So when we're talking about great power politics, as you remember it from the historical background that I just gave to you, you can see that the major part of all of the events and all of the advancement and evolution was actually enabled by the actions that these great powers were taking. Because yes, colonization and wars were mostly implemented by them, but meanwhile, the scientific discoveries and inventions, all of this progress was also done in the same place, in these great powers. So basically, they were the key players in the game, and it is them, for example, who have orchestrated our Congress of Vienna or Versailles, or who have established the United Nations. So basically, they are the founding fathers of the current international system. Secondly, it is technology, because without the technology, actually, this debate that we are having right now, most probably it wouldn't even be able to come into life, because without the steam engine, without the manufacturers, without the rails and ships and etc., we wouldn't be able to see the expansion of the Western powers or of the great powers into other countries, and this wouldn't have brought us to the point where we are right now. So the third one is the events. When we're talking about events, we cannot just see them as just points in the history. They're not. Because, for example, when we're talking about Westphalia, or French Revolution, or Congress of Versailles, it's not just a moment in the history, in time. No, there is a pre-history of this that led to the happening of this event. And there is also post-history of that, the influence that it has left, and, for example, how it has influenced international security studies. That's why when we, as social scientists, when we analyze them, we have to be taking into consideration that it's a whole multitude of various factors, political, philosophical, social, economic, and not just a point in time. Another one is academic debate, and we're going to touch upon this in a moment in more profound way. But if to mention, we have to understand that there is different types of scientists, different types of thoughts and approaches and schools, and that's why we cannot have this unanimous understanding of security, because basically it is impossible, since various scientists, they were backing just different approaches. And the fifth, it is institutions that were involved in the evolution of the international security studies, because in every institution we have various bureaucratic dynamics, and in one way or another it also influences our understanding of the security. So now let's talk in a broader way about the academic debate that we have, and about the security itself, because actually the whole dilemma here is consisted of four major questions that had to be answered in order to understand what one means by saying security. So the first thing is this. Okay, security. We are securing something or someone, but who or what? Who is to be secure? What is to be secured? Is it the state, a human, women, colonized countries, or who or what? So we call this as a referent object. A referent object means someone or something that is to be secured. It's a main question in security studies, because if we're going to secure someone, who we're going to secure, or what we're going to secure. If it is a state, like for example in realism, liberalism, or conventional constructivism, we're going to focus on the state. If it is a human, like in human security, then we're going to focus on human. If it is women, like in feminist approach, then we're going to focus on that. Second question is this. Who are you protecting this referent object from? From someone from the inside or outside? Are we talking about internal threats or external threats? Because as you remember, in the very beginning, a state was responsible for the protection from the external threats, from invaders. And for instance, when we're talking about an intrastate, now the problem is the state itself. So we're talking about more about internal issues, internal threats. The third point is this. When we're talking about security, what kind of security we're talking about? Is it just military, as it used to be throughout the greatest part of history, or it is about economic security, economic sector, or is it about political field, or is it about environmental security? So we have to understand the spectrum. Are we focusing this way or in this way? And last but not the least, is the security inextricably tied to our dynamic of threats, dangers, and urgency? And why do we raise this point? As an example, think of this. Let's say we are having an environmental disaster, and there were some groups of people who were affected. As an example, think of this. For instance, there's a gun shooting in the school, and it happened once. So now the question is this: is the government going to? Of course it will, but is it going to be temporary? Or is it going to be there for all the time? Like, for example, they're going to straighten the security measures in the schools, for example, in the entrance. Is it going to be temporary, or is it going to be there forever? So this is one of the discussions in academic fields, for example. Should a particular matter be securitized all of the time, or for a particular period of time? We will see that, for example, in Copenhagen School, in Speech Act. And another important part of the academic debate is this. Because, when we're talking about science and when we are talking about the research, we always take for granted one point: funding. And let's say if you are a university, public university, you are more independent. You are more impartial rather than, for instance, private university or a think tank. Because when we're talking about think tanks, we imply that there is a particular fundraising from a particular group. And we can even point, and we can even, And we know, for example, that particular think tanks are backing, trying to justify particular policies. For example, let's say if we are talking about Carnegie Institute, or let's say Institute of War. So basically we know that some think tanks, so basically we know that every think tank is backing particular policy. For example, some of them are backing more leftist, central leftist policies, some of them are backing more nationalistic policies, etc., etc. So that was another important part of this academic debate for the IR scholars. So now let's summarize everything. We have security studies that were evolved throughout the history, and it was influenced by a variety of factors, like great power politics, like technology, like academic debate, like different historical events, like institutions. And the question always was, who to secure it from, what are we securing, and should it be always there or just as a temporary measure? And this process of changing the referent object from state, for example, to human or to something else, we call it deepening. If we're talking about expanding our spectrum of the security areas, different sectors, we call it broadening. So these are the most important parts of the security. And lastly, let me give an example from one of the presentations that I did for my classmates. So basically, I put my laptop in the center of the room, and I've asked all the students that were situated in different parts of the class to draw the same laptop. And what happened in the end? Everyone had a different drawing. It was the object was the same, but the perspective was still different. And here in security studies, we have the same situation. We have different theories, different approaches, different perspectives. And while some of them differentiate only in terms of the way how they're making their research, some of them drastically vary from each other on the very fundamental layer. And I think it's going to be useful for us to understand these levels of analysis. So basically, as you maybe know this or remember this from the philosophy of science, we have 4 levels of analysis. As a fundament, we have ontology, right? Ontology asks the question, what? So basically, for the security studies, if we apply, what is to be secured, who is to be secured? We ask this question on the ontological level. Next, it is epistemology. On the epistemological layer, we're asking the question of how do we acquire the knowledge? Are we acquiring it from the philosophical writings? Are we acquiring it from the math? Are we using some sociological approach or not? Next one is methodology, which is actually about what kind of methods do we use. And the last one is the research methods. I think I need to make a separate video for this one, and I think it's not going to take that long as this video, but still. And for instance, if we're talking about classical realism and classical liberalism, on the ontological level, they differed because for realism, actually the human nature was bad, and for liberalism, the human nature was good. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope this video was insightful and useful for you. I hope you're going to benefit from that, and I'm really sorry for it being that long, but you know, I just explained to you several centuries of history and plenty of philosophical ideas, and that's why it takes a bit of time to chew it up, because in social sciences, I think, especially when we're talking about IR, the context is enormously important, because if you study international relations just by reading the keynotes, most probably you won't understand it, because you need to have this background knowledge of history and philosophy. That's why we have these classes in the first and second grades, for us to be able to go back into the, let's say, our library and to check for the information to understand it better. Because, for example, when we are going to talk about behavioralism or Paris School or, let's say, post-colonial approach, we have to take it into account that there was a history behind it, and we cannot just evade it and pretend like there is nothing that happened, and we cannot just evade it, because you cannot take knowledge out of the context. That's why I had to also talk about this one as well. So again, thank you very much. And also, if you want to discuss something, or if you see that I made some particular mistakes throughout my video, please write this in the comments part so I can correct myself, or we can have a fruitful discussion on something. I would be more than content for this. Thank you very much once again. See you in the next videos. For sure.